Why is it that Indiana, a state with some of the lowest living costs in the country, hasn't become a hotspot for Americans looking to relocate? With its affordable housing, lower than average expenses, and bustling cities like Indianapolis, you'd think it would be a magnet for new residents. Yet Indiana's population remains far behind that of neighboring states like Illinois and Ohio. What's keeping people away from this seemingly underrated state? Well, let's dive into the surprising reasons why so few Americans choose to call Indiana home. Indiana's population puzzle. Alright, let's get into Indiana, right in the heart of the Midwest. It's got everything you'd expect from a classic Midwestern state. Lake Michigan up to the northwest, borders with Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, Illinois, and even the Ohio and Wabash rivers. Known as the Hoosier State, Indiana is the 38th largest by area, and it sits around 17th when it comes to population, with Indianapolis as its bustling capital. But here's the thing. For a state with so much to offer, its population numbers might surprise you. Indiana's got a deep history. Before it became a state, it was home to various indigenous peoples for thousands of years. And even after statehood, it still held on to that identity, hence the name Indiana. Fast forward, and the state became a bit of a melting pot. People from New England and New York settled in the north. People from Ohio and the Mid-Atlantic moved into central Indiana. And down south, it was the crowd from Kentucky and Tennessee making their mark. Indiana's landscape is just as varied as its past. It sits right where the eastern woodlands meet the open prairies of the Midwest, creating a mix of terrains that keep things interesting. In the south, you've got rolling hills, while up north, it's all about flat plains, both shaped by glaciers from the last ice age. To really get the feel of Indiana's geography, you've got to think of it in three parts: the northern lakes and moraines, the central Till Plains, and the southern lowlands, each with its own unique vibe that adds to the state's character. Now, economically speaking, Indiana's no slouch. The state's economy was worth over $352 billion in 2021, with thriving cities and towns scattered across the map. You've got Indianapolis with its Colts and Pacers, and of course, the legendary Indianapolis 500. But here's where things get interesting. Despite all this, Indiana's population hovers around 6.8 million. That's less than Massachusetts, and way behind Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois, which have populations of 10 million, 11.8 million, and 12.5 million, respectively. And even within the state, the numbers tell a story. Sure, Indianapolis leads with around 2.1 million people, but then you have Fort Wayne with just 450,000 and South Bend with 324,000. Compare that to Chicago's 9.33 million or Detroit's 4.3 million, and you start to see the difference. Even Ohio cities like Columbus and Cincinnati are pulling in bigger numbers. So why isn't Indiana drawing more people in? That's the question we're here to unpack. And trust me, it's more fascinating than you might think. One of the most affordable places to live. Let's talk about the cost of living in Indiana. Because if there's one thing the Hoosier State is known for, it's being easy on the wallet. Indiana consistently makes the cut on lists like Forbes and Yahoo's rankings of the cheapest places to live in the US, coming in at 10th and 15th respectively. And according to Rent Cafe, living here is about 10% cheaper than the national average. You can save a bit on everything: food, healthcare, transportation, with costs sitting at least 4% lower than what most Americans pay. But where Indiana really shines is in its housing market. Rent Cafe also points out that the housing costs in Indiana are a solid 22% below the national average. Now, there's a bit of debate over just how affordable homes here really are. Rocket Mortgage says that the median home price is around $186,100, while Zillow estimates it closer to $231,519. Either way, it's still far cheaper than many other parts of the country, making it a magnet for those looking to stretch their dollar further. However, there's a twist. Despite the affordability, Indiana landed only number 29 on US News & World Report's overall rankings for the best states to live in. Why? Well, affordability is just one piece of the puzzle. The state lags behind in areas like education, healthcare, and environment, which brings its overall appeal down a few notches. Let me break it down. Education, healthcare, and environment. When it comes to education, Indiana finds itself in a tough spot. A good education can open doors to a brighter future, but not every state is able to offer the same level of quality. According to WalletHub, Indiana ranks as one of the least educated states in the nation, sitting at the 40th spot overall. This might be surprising given the presence of prestigious institutions like Notre Dame, Purdue, Butler, and Indiana University. Yet only 38% of Indiana's nearly 6.8 million residents hold a college degree. A big reason for this? High school students are increasingly skipping college, worried about the costs and unsure about which careers to pursue, as highlighted by new research from the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. While a good education doesn't guarantee a higher salary or endless opportunities, there's no denying the link between quality learning and future success. But it's not just education that falls short in Indiana. Healthcare is another major concern. In a Forbes Advisor study that reviewed healthcare quality across all 50 states, Indiana didn't fare well, ranking as the 10th worst state for meeting its residents' healthcare needs. The state scored a concerning 79.01 out of 100, where 100 represents the worst performance. The study examined factors like healthcare access, outcomes, cost, and the quality of hospital care. Indiana scored particularly low in healthcare access and outcomes, with ratings of 66.17 and 74.13. The state has just 12.59 primary care physicians per 100,000 residents, which is far from ideal. Plus, Hoosiers pay an average of $1,774 annually for single health insurance coverage through an employer. Not exactly pocket change. When it comes to the cost of healthcare, Indiana's score was 85.76. Remember, a higher score here means worse performance. So while Indiana is somewhat affordable in terms of living costs, healthcare affordability is still a significant issue. On a slightly better note, Indiana scored 31.02 for the quality of hospital care, a lower score which in this study means relatively better performance. But that's a small comfort when so many residents still face challenges in accessing and affording quality healthcare. And then there's the environment, another big hurdle for the Hoosier state. Indiana's got a bit of a reputation for pollution. Poor air and water quality are ongoing issues, partly due to a heavy reliance on cars and a lack of investment in public transit. Add to that the coal-fired power plants in the Southwest, whose emissions get carried across the state by the winds, and you've got a recipe for environmental trouble. In 2019, pollution took a serious toll on Indiana, causing 1,636 premature deaths and triggering 2,115 new cases of pediatric asthma. But even those numbers don't compare to Illinois, which had some of the worst rates in the Midwest, with 2,683 early deaths and a staggering 7,683 new cases of asthma in kids. But even though Indiana still has a lower population than Illinois, it makes you wonder if this really could be the cause. On the other hand, Indiana actually tops the list for the most polluted waterways in the country, with nearly 25,000 miles of rivers and streams too contaminated for swimming or recreation. That's more than any other state. That's a shocking statistic, considering it's been 50 years since the Clean Water Act set the goal for cleaner, safer water. So while living in Indiana might be easy on your wallet, the challenges in education, healthcare, and the environment are hard to ignore. The real question is, does the low cost of living make up for these downsides? That's up for debate, but it's clear that Indiana has some hurdles to overcome if it wants to attract and retain more residents in the future. Most especially, the X factor makes them unique. Indiana's missing X factor for population growth. Interestingly, Indiana just doesn't have that it factor that sparks a population boom. Think about it. States like Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio all have something that put them on the map. Let's start with Chicago. Perched on the southwestern shore of Lake Michigan, it quickly became a major hub for trade and transportation. The opening of the Illinois and Michigan Canal in 1848 and the arrival of the railroads soon after made Chicago the go-to place for moving goods between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. The city's growth was off the charts, solidifying its status as the second city of the United States. Then you have Detroit, positioned right on the Detroit River, connecting Lake Erie and Lake St. Clair. This location was key for shipping and trade, but it was the rise of the automotive industry that sent Detroit's population skyrocketing. People from all over flocked there for jobs, and the city quickly became the heartbeat of American manufacturing. Cleveland had a similar story, located on the southern shore of Lake Erie and benefiting from its spot at the mouth of the Cuyahoga River. This gave Cleveland access to both the Great Lakes and the Ohio River system, making it a crucial industrial and shipping hub in its heyday. All of these cities played massive roles in boosting the populations of their states. Now, let's flip back to Indiana. Unlike its neighbors, Indiana didn't have that big defining moment or feature. Sure, it's got plenty of fertile farmland, but it never developed the same level of industrial power or transportation networks during those key growth periods. The state's economy has always been more diversified, never leaning too heavily on one particular industry or resource to drive growth. In other words, Indiana never had that one big wave to ride. Even with access to the Ohio River in the south and a corner of Lake Michigan in the northwest, Indiana never built up those areas like Chicago or Detroit did. And then there's Indianapolis, the state's largest city, sitting pretty far inland, away from any natural features that could have propelled its growth, like a major waterway or trade route. So while Indiana has its own set of strengths, it just doesn't have that big, bold feature that puts other states on the map. It's had steady, moderate growth, but without that catalyst, it never experienced the explosive expansion of its neighbors. Anyway, as we wrap up, what do you think? Is it the lack of a major economic driver, the challenges in education and healthcare, or something else entirely? Could Indiana's quiet charm actually be its greatest strength? Or is there something more it needs to become a top destination? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's see what the future might hold for the Hoosier State. Also, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.